Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and tonight we are talking about No Country for Old Men, aging in Supernatural. But before we jump into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Susan.
Hi, Susan Nylander. I teach English at Barstow College in California, and I have been a supernatural scholar for quite a number of years now. I have a text that is a collection of essays about death and supernatural, along with my writing partner, Mandy. And this is a perfect segue. Our lovely co-contributor today, Lynn Zubernis, wrote our afterword for that death and supernatural text.
And Lynn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Westchester University. Also a supernatural fan from the beginning. Fan studies is kind of my thing, and a lot of that has been around supernatural fandom. So I have two books, Family Don't End with Blood, and There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, which are written by the fans and the actors of Supernatural. And this is the first time I get to say this anywhere, but I have a new book coming out that's now on pre-order about the boys called Soup Ain't Always Heroes. Which some contributions by some of your favorite actors, but also a lot of psychologists and sociologists and media experts. It's a deep dive into that show.
Awesome. And I'm Gail Martin. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I'm not an academic, I'm just obsessed. I fell in love with the show halfway through season 11, watched 11 seasons in 4 months to start live tweeting season 12, and I haven't looked back since. I did write a chapter for Lynn's There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, and I'm a regular blogger for the Winchester Family Business, but yeah, I never looked back, so definitely falling down the rabbit hole, never hit bottom, hope I never do. Anyhow, we start this show with two guys in their early 20s. Sam's about 22, Dean's about 26. John is their father, but not, there's not a huge age gap there beyond the normal to have kids that age. And yet as the show goes on, both Sam and Dean get older. 15 years takes a toll on everybody. We get to see a lot of different characters. And we see characters of every age. So hunting is a rough business. We see people in a line of obsession. Can't really call it a line of work because you don't get paid, but a line of contribution, of dedication that takes a huge toll, both physically and psychologically. And so let's talk about not only how the show portrays older characters, but also within the world of the show, what aging means for the characters themselves within their world. Start us off, Susan. Pick an episode and get us going.
Well, there's a lot about aging and ageism in Supernatural. I was very surprised as I went through the episodes and realized just how many actually deal with this topic. And I think part of it is that as we meet Bobby at the end of season 1, Bobby becomes sort of our representative of the older hunter who's been at it, maybe not all of his life like Sam and Dean, but quite a number of years. And so often we can look through what the aging hunter goes through, looking just at Bobby, but we also see Bobby through Sam and Dean. And what we find too, I think, is interesting is that Sam and Dean have a lot of conversations about growing older. And there's a lot of fear that either they will grow older or they won't. It's kind of interesting because Sam, I think, still throughout most of the show has the idea of growing older, living a normal life, and being able to do that, while Dean, we often hear Dean talk about the fact that he's going to die with a gun in his hand. He's going to die on the job. He's going to die violently. We're not in the live till you're 90 profession is I'm paraphrasing that line that he says, so we see them discuss age and aging and the prospects of that quite a lot. And then we also get examples of what happens when hunters get older, and a lot of them don't get older. I think again, as Bobby is representation, and then when we meet Rufus, when we first meet him, is hermited. He's in his house. He's drinking his bottle of Johnny when he can get it, and he doesn't. When Dean first comes to his door, he basically says, "I'm what you've got to look forward to," and he doesn't say it in a complimentary way about himself. So this idea of hunters growing old, there's no growing old gracefully at all in the show. That's kind of what I see as a lot. If we want to start early on, this will be after that first Rufus episode, but in season 4, episode 12, Chris Angel is a douchebag. I think this is a very explicit episode that deals with aging. We've got Barry Bostwick, who plays a magician who's getting older, and there's a couple of younger magicians who are constantly harassing him or looking down on him for being old. He doesn't have the dexterity that he once had when he was younger. We see that when he's with the cards, and he can't manipulate them as well as he used to. And so this idea of growing older and losing who you are, if who you are is what you do, I think we see that a lot in that particular episode. And it's also the episode where Sam makes a decision to go with Ruby because he says, "I don't want to be doing this as an old man." So I just talked a lot and kind of threw some stuff out there. So I'm interested to hear what Lynn has to say. I'm sure there's a psychological, reference we can go to with that.
Oh, that's one of my favorite episodes. So I'm glad we're hitting that one early. Lynn?
Yeah, that's a really complex episode. I have said this so many times about so many different topics, but so often, like on the surface, Supernatural is this, genre show, kind of a horror show, an adventure show, a fantasy show about hunters, muscle car, going after the bad guys. But from the very beginning, and this is true for everything Eric Kripke does, from the very beginning, it is so deep. Like there are existential themes that are running through this show from the very beginning. And, obviously, Susan, you know this better than anyone. You put out a whole book on how death is treated in Supernatural, but there's so much of Supernatural that is based on that existential fear of death, not just death as the end of life, but death as your identity, no longer being who makes you you, which for so many people that, the fear is not necessarily of death itself. It is of aging. And because the fear is that aging will take your identity away and take the things that you really value about yourself as a person. I remember the first time we met Rufus, and for some reason, Bobby, I think, was such a lovable character that, yeah, you did also see Bobby kind of gruffly say, "This is what you have to look forward to. You're going to be running a scrapyard with your dog out there and hunting when you can." And, it wasn't exactly a positive look at the future, but Rufus was so much darker. That seemed so much darker to me that it was almost shocking when we met Rufus. And there was a moment of by that time, we were in love with the boys. We were in love with the brothers. We wanted good things for them, whatever that meant, even if that meant I just want them to be hunters forever on my TV screen. So being faced with Rufus being such a realist and putting that raw, gritty, realistic, hey, this isn't going to end any differently, not for either of you, not for me, not for Bobby. I remember that being shocking to see that the first time. And I think it made me extra grateful for, I don't mind that, by the way. I like Supernatural being a dark show. I don't want Supernatural to be la la la. That's not the show that it was. So I like that it confronted me with that. But I also like that eventually we did get balancing out moments. Like we did get to see the episode with Jesse and Caesar, who were the hunters who successfully retired and were now growing old together. And I mean, Sam and Dean helped them kind of do that sort of final piece that they need to do in order to let go of being hunters, but they're going to make it. They're actually going to be two hunters who, had their whole hunting career and were passionate about it and were able to walk away. And Sam and Dean don't want to take that away from them. They recognize that there's a real value there. So I'm glad that Supernatural balances out that dark look at the future, but I also really value that it goes there. That's what makes it such an itty, angsty show, is that darkness.
I remember being, early in my career, my early 20s, and running into people who were in their late 40s, early 50s, and having somebody who's at that point in their life and may not be completely happy with the way things have turned out, giving well, make sure you know what you're getting into. This is just, you're not gonna like how this goes, or this doesn't work out for everybody. And it's as much about their disillusionment and disappointment with their outcomes and choices as any advice for the new person, which you don't realize at first. You just think, oh God, this is terrible. But I think we see that with Bobby and Rufus, because they're saying as much about their own view of their current situation as any advice to Sam and Dean. They know Winchesters aren't going to get out of the game before it's over. Come on, they're Winchesters. But both of them have, been around the track the hard way a few times, and I think both men had a lot of regrets. So they can't help putting that into their voice. The juxtaposition I love is we got to see Dean in The Curious Case of Dean Winchester get old and turn into, the guy from Chips. And then we also got to see him de-aged in the Hansel and Gretel episode back to about 14. And it's rare to ever get that about a character going both directions, seeing them as a crotchety old man and then seeing them as, a kid going through puberty. And, of course, Dean has to make comments about things both ways, Viagra on one hand and it's up, it's down, I don't know what to do with it, to Sam's mortification. But I thought that was an interesting look at aging. Both, you could start over again, you could get rid of Mark Kane, you could do what the girl does and have a fresh slate, or you could go out grouching about everything, and so that's one of my favorite aging ones, two of my favorite aging ones, just because we get it both ways.
I thought that the actors also in those two episodes that were portraying, Chad Everett, we remember him from Medical Center back in the 60s, yeah. Heartthrob, right? But I completely bought him as Dean, and Dylan Everett as the 14-year-old Dean. I completely bought him as Dean. Part of that was Sam's reaction and working with the other actors, but they were so Dean at opposite ends of the aging spectrum. And that was another one on my list, The Curious Case of Dean Winchester, where Bobby's still in a wheelchair at this point, and so Sam is the only one that's actually still his age, and grumpy old men that he recognizes them as, that they're bickering and complaining. But it gives Dean another sense of what it is to be in Bobby's shoes physically, not in the wheelchair or anything at that point, but the physical demands, the backache, the trying to dig a grave, at whatever age he's supposed to be, 80. So the insight that Dean gets, I think, into Bobby perhaps is an important piece of that particular episode. And then, the other end of that, the young Dean being able to, I think you're right. I think a lot of us of a certain age maybe have that fantasy. Oh man, if I could just get myself back in my, teenage body with all of my memories and experiences. Oh, look at it, the things I could do, right? But life doesn't work that way for us. So I think it's a really interesting point where we look at, the girl, yeah, maybe she'll do it right this time. Maybe this gives her another chance. And so she embraces that. Whereas Dean doesn't want to start again. He wants to go back to who he is with Sam, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was such a powerful message about aging, that Dean chooses not to go back, because it's true. Like so many of us, if given would you like to be 14 again? My instinctive reaction is hell yes. I'd love to be 14 again. But that's one of the things I love about Dean Winchester. Dean Winchester is quite content with who he is when it comes to his really internal sense of self throughout the entire series, but more and more as it goes along. And he doesn't want to give that up, just like in The French Mistake. Do you want to stay in this alternate universe where you're a rich actor and you have this fancy trailer and house and wife or whatever? But no, I want to be who I am. I want to be Dean Winchester. I want Sam to be my brother. I want to be the same age as my brother. I think it's really striking that Dean doesn't choose to do that, even though in that case, it also would have been a brilliant solution of getting the mark of Cain off of him, which was a big deal. So I love that they did that. I also love that we got a chance to see Dean older, because it's one thing to kind of hear about, Rufus or Bobby warning that this is what you have to look forward to, and to hear Sam and Dean kind of coming from their different takes of, well, are we going to be able to do this forever? We're not going to be able to do this forever, because you get to see, no, Dean really can't. They really can't do this forever. When he is in that older body, he can't physically do the things that are required to be a hunter. So there's a real darkness there too, in that, or maybe just let's call it a realism that the show is not afraid to go to, that doesn't shy away from, because yeah, you can't be a hunter always. Just like, guess what? You can't be a lot of things forever. I mean, that is real.
Yeah, exactly. That just makes me think about too, the watchmaker in Clap Your Hands If You Believe. The watchmaker takes this opportunity when the leprechaun comes along and says, hey, no, we'll take care of it, just like the borrowers, right? Or the little guys doing the work for him. But he pays a terrible price. And so that, again, it just shows that it's not just the hunters who can't continue to do what they do for a long time. A lot of people, the watchmaker in particular is who I think about, but also Hunter Heroici, that episode with Mike Farrell playing the older guy that was telekinetic, and what happens to someone like him when they lose their mind, and the doctor is able to use his power to do all of these terrible things, while he keeps him occupied in the cartoon world. So, on the surface, it's kind of a wacky episode. And at its base, it's a poignant moment, especially at the end when Jones is his last name. I was trying to remember the character's name, Jones. He recognizes that something's got to give, because he can't continue like this as able to be telekinetic, but to be used like that, because his mind was going. And he allows Castiel to sort of fix that, if you will.
Again,
That
like such a primal fear, right? It's not just our fear of physical aging, it's our fear that we won't be ourselves, that we won't be in control of ourselves, that our minds won't function in the same way. And damned if the show isn't willing to go right there again.
regarding
It's
Dean,
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
regarding Dean, that
dementia. Yeah.
oh, that one hit me really hard because I took care of my mother who had Alzheimer's. I took care of her until she passed away. And I think I could have handled any physical ailment that I needed to help her with so much easier rather than the dementia. If she was still her, I could
Mhm.
have helped her in all the, it would hurt to see her physically decline, but to see her mentally decline was 1,000 times worse. And so to see her lose who she was, to see her lose me, she didn't know who I was most of the time at the end. And that I think was 1,000 times worse than any physical decline could have been. And yeah, so the show has done that on multiple occasions. And so that particular episode regarding Dean, it hit me so hard. So anyone who's had that experience with a loved one who is slowly becoming not them anymore had to be just hit right in the heart with that
Mhm.
episode.
Well, and we also got to see a cautionary tale of the price of wanting immortality in China's on My Side.
The Frankenstein guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
all the
was,
different
it
body
was
parts. Yeah.
terrifying. And, for that moment, Sam's willing to go there. If it keeps Dean with him, Sam's willing to make a bargain here. It's Dean who steps back from it, but we definitely get the sense that Sam would have gone with him. And there's actually some rather fantastic fan fiction to that effect. But yeah, that the cautionary tale of the price tag for immortality.
And again, like, of course, it's played out in a horror show, so we're horrified when we think of it, of having to like get organs from dead people and put yourself back together. And he certainly didn't look very well put together by the time that we met was it Doc Benton? Is that what his name is? I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like, who can't relate to how Sam is feeling when you're going to lose someone that you love? You would want to do anything to keep them with you, especially when they're a relatively young person. Dean was a young person. So I think we can all relate to Sam's wish to just desperately do anything, even though, again, it's supernatural. So it played out in the darkest, most horrifying way possible.
Well, being Winchesters, honestly, that wasn't their worst possibility. Sam going dark side, embracing his destiny as the boy king of hell and marching into hell to save Dean was arguably worse. So, on a Winchester scale, that wasn't the worst that could happen.
Well, and then there was Martin,
Mhm.
Crazy Martin, as Dean calls him, right? When they meet him and Sam interrupted in the asylum or the sanitarium, wherever they go in. And one of my favorite parts of that whole episode is when they're telling the doctor absolutely the truth about how they're searching for the devil, and they've got this angel, and tells them totally the truth. And the doctor, of course, thinks, they're both nuts. But that's their way into, and then when they come across Martin, and then later Martin goes again, we see aging and hunting don't go very well together. With Martin in particular, when he goes after Benny, I think he so wants to be relevant. He so wants to be the same guy that maybe he once was, that he's not going to listen to anybody else. He thinks, Benny needs to die and that's it. And he's going to be the one to do it. And, he's so used to still being the elder, and not Dean and Sam are pushing against and resisting his experience. And I think that's maybe what pushes Martin a little bit more, where he says, oh, you know, if your father could see you now, kind of attitude. And so I think he doesn't like being marginalized or put aside. And I think that that's part of what makes him decide to take things into his own hands and go after Benny, against what Sam and Dean both have said. So Martin's story didn't end well at all. And I felt bad for Martin most of the time, although, you know.
I don't know. I felt pretty bad for Benny too.
Oh yeah, no, I did. Especially because Benny had such a nice thing going.
Yeah.
You know, just working at nights at his what, great granddaughter's gumbo shack, you know. I mean, I think Benny could have found that balance that he wanted, you know, because here he comes back after all those years, 50 years gone, and now the world has changed. So in some ways, even though he's a vampire, so he's still younger, he's still got that. I mean, look how many years he's been around, right? So that's another thing that's kind of interesting. Look at the husband and wife witches. They are still young, but they've been married for how many years? I mean, they were with the Medicis, right? So Renaissance, you know, Florence, they were around in during the Renaissance. So how many years can you continue to live, even if your body is willing? But don't you sort of embrace a generational thing? I'm just wondering about that too. That goes to, there's all kinds of shows that deal with that, where we talk about, hey, if I could be 14 again, but I'd have to know everything I still know now. I'd have to have had all my experiences. I'd have to be able to do that. I don't want to go back and not know anything. But that's
most of the time I feel like on Supernatural, when somebody is thwarting like the natural order by like living forever or whatever, there's always a price to be paid. Like it never really goes well. And it is a theme that really runs throughout the show. I mean, anytime that a character is a vampire, you're dealing with aging, or in that case, non-aging. Many of the witches, Rowena, one of the main characters, I actually wish my favorite episodes with Rowena were when we got to hear about her past and the tragedy of her past about Fergus and losing him and then losing Gavin and what that did to the complicated relationship she had with Crowley. But I wish we had heard even more about what it was like for her. She went to great lengths to stay young and beautiful, and it's touched on a little bit, but I wish we had even gotten to dig deeper into it, because I love that character. I thought Ruth Connell did a fabulous job. She happens to be beautiful, but what an interesting price Rowena paid to stay young over all that time. A huge emotional price throughout the show.
Well, that segues great into the next point that I had, which is let's talk about cougars, because there were a lot of cougars on this show.
Oh yeah.
Just a quick rundown that I got out off the top of my head was Mildred in the Banshee episode, the swap meet episode with the the dominatrix, the Hellhound Ranch with the glasses, the multi-generational family on the ranch, and the poor Sam. There was the cougar at the dance with Bella, again, poor Sam,
Right.
and Annie with the foxholes. So we got a bunch of cougars, maybe not.
Don't forget the two sisters in the Clue episode.
In the Clue, Ask Jeeves, yeah.
Yes.
Not surprised. You've got these two gorgeous young guys, and maybe a bit of a wink and a nod to that audience at all of those conventions that they have to look out on and say, most of these people are the age of my mother. The cougar is strong, but how do you think it was treated in terms of aging? Susan?
Oh, go ahead, Susan. No, I want to hear, go ahead. You called on Susan. Now Susan gets to go first. Ha ha.
To say, no, I think Lynn needs to talk about this. Actually, I think with the, it was played for laughs, obviously, in Ask Jeeves. Sam's lactose intolerant line made me laugh very hard. But at the same time, you kind of feel bad for the woman because, man, she really thought she was going to get 10 minutes of, paradise there for a second. But, he's able to sneak past that. But, and then Miss Havisham, as he calls her, the old lady in the Bella episode where he has to dance with her and deal with her. What I find was interesting was that he calls her Mrs. Case because she's a widow, but then she says, "Oh, please, Ms. Case." Like that changes anything, doesn't say call me by my first name, but Ms. like that's got, I still don't quite know what she was trying to get across by that other than
I think she was just trying to say, I am not married, I am single, I am available, and that was the most explicit way to say it.
I suppose so. Yeah. So that was but I think a lot of it is played for laughs. The only one and it still was Into the Mystic, where we have the woman at the and I think it again really puts top of mind for Sam and Dean when they go to the quote old folks home, even though it's got all kinds of great things and it's seems very social, and Mildred is pretty vibrant and and yeah, she goes after Dean with the hand on the leg and all of that. But I think again it brings them back to the conversation, especially Sam saving the brochure to the place. I think it shows them that maybe perhaps this is a wish I can still hang on to, that I can outlive this dangerous life that I've had to live. But I think Mildred, while there are moments that it's played for laughs, I think we respect Mildred when she does offer Dean the advice on how to live a long and happy life. Because he's so desperate when she said, "Would you like the secret to that?" And oh, yes, please. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they got marginally better at it as time went on, but I'm ambivalent about the way that they played that as a repeated theme. I mean, it certainly is ageism and sexism. There's no other basis for
yeah.
it. That's definitely what's going on. And it's funny. I mean, I laughed when I was watching it. But most of the time, it definitely has an edge of kind of ew, which, when I teach human development to grad students who are going to be therapists, that's not really the way you want to look at mature sexuality. You don't want to look at it with ew. It's not ew.
Right.
Now, do you want to look at somebody putting a hand on someone's leg that's not wanted as ew? Yeah, sure. But that's not really how they were playing it. They were really playing with the age part of it. And if you switch the genders, if that was an older man and an attractive young woman,
Right.
nobody would be going, ooh. I mean, it's telling that all of us sort of, our commentary when we started out was poor Sam. If
Right.
if the genders were switched there, nobody would be saying, oh, poor,
Yeah.
poor,
Or Samantha. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's not one of my favorite parts of the show. I don't think it's terrible, egregious thing. And the show did start in 2005. And I think it got better with all of its sexism as time went on, but I'm not a huge fan of all that being played for laughs.
Well, and Mandy and I we're editing a text about women in Supernatural, and there's a lot of critical ways that we look at how women are treated and mistreated, used and abused throughout the series. And so there's a lot of great things, but we're not shying away in our text from being critical about when it's called for. And you're right, that yes, if we swap the genders, that would definitely be a different take, a different way of, it would be a different you. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of respect for Annie because she made, the boys, you could tell, looked back on that night and they weren't repulsed by it. Everybody had a good time. They
were
were kind of
fondly-
squeaked out. They
yeah.
were kind of squeaked out that Bobby shared the experience. But other than that, they both had a good time. And that's with a woman who, I can't guess quite how much older she was than they were, but somewhat. And so, and she comes back as a ghost and helps save their asses. So I really saw Annie as a positive there.
Yeah.
Um,
What season was that, Gail? That was because that was a later season. Like
that was a somewhat later season.
Yeah.
Bobby's a ghost, so it
Well,
has
Yeah.
it was the season that
7.
Bobby died, so it was season 7.
yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But I did think that one was positive. And then we really have to give a shout out for the poor lady with the peach cobbler who kept trying to impress Bobby.
Yeah.
She wasn't, I don't know that she was any older than Bobby. She wasn't a pretty young thing. She probably made an impressive peach cobbler, but it just wasn't going to happen. So
Wasn't
using
that the
those
episode
memo-
with didn't she end up in the wood chipper?
Yeah,
She- but the
she didn't.
bad
It
guy
was
who
her wood
paid
chipper.
attended Bobby's, yeah.
Yeah, but it's
No.
interesting that she used the lure of my wood chipper is not working. Can you come fix it? She uses that as a lure to get Bobby to come visit her. So that was kind of an interesting. Bobby's very handy.
Yes. So what next?
I was looking at also Stuck in the Middle with You, when we have Mary and she's we don't find out later, this is in season 12, the British Men of Letters has sent her to get the colt, but hey, you already had one. Sorry, my dogs are both right here. They when she and Wally are watching, they're looking at who we find out later is Ramiel, but Wally says, "This is our target, some old guy who likes to fish." And so Mary says, "Well, technically I'm in my 60s." So, that moment when, Mary's again in her 30s body, but technically she's in her 60s, so don't discount the danger.
Which are getting together with Catch as well.
Oh, exactly. There was also the episode in season 12 with I think it was it 12? Twigs and Twine and Tasha Barnes, when the old witch she's scared now, suddenly she's going to have to go to hell, so she's trying to find a young witch to take her place. And so you see a lot of the fear of aging and the fear of this is JoJo, everybody. This is JoJo. So you got the fear of aging that shows up, I think, in quite a few places too. And of course, that lady's bound for hell because she sold her soul. So yeah, she's got a reason to be afraid. But she's, and poor Max loses his mom and his sister. So he's willing to take on her magic. We never do follow up with that. And it would be interesting to see what he and his, he puts his sister's heart in the twig body to go on. So, I think that fear of aging shows up a lot in.
I always thought it would have been interesting. I wasn't really very happy with the whole Mary arc as much as I love Samantha Smith. It would have been so interesting, and I thought they were going to do this when she came back. I thought, oh, this is such a great opportunity to explore some things that are about aging, because here's Mary, who died when she was whatever, in her 20s or 30 or whatever, very young, and was kind of frozen in that time in heaven with her little infant Sam and her toddler Dean, then whoosh, brought back to life. If she had lived all through those years, she would have been in her 60s, but she didn't. So to her, she still feels like someone who's 30, but now she has sons who are like 30 themselves. I thought there was so much potential there to really empathize with Mary's plight of how this is developmentally inappropriate. How can I think of myself as the parent of these two men who I am perceiving as like the same age as me? They couldn't possibly be my children who I left as an infant and a toddler. And they could have given us so much more empathy for her plight if they had
Yes.
really gone there, and they never really went there. I will never really understand why they didn't. But that, I mean, that's a situation that you can only have happen on a fantasy sci-fi show. That doesn't happen in real life, but it would have been an interesting exploration for how much we code our world and our relationships in terms of age, and how wrong it feels when something is sort of impossible in terms of age. And then how do you deal with that?
Well,
And
and in the
Sorry, go
real
ahead.
world, parents have enough difficulty letting go of their normally aged children when they become adults, and re-navigating that relationship when your children are now fully grown up. What's the relationship? Why do they need you? How does that work? As opposed to having, bang, now my kids are 37 and 40. I didn't see that coming. There's no transition there. So yes, I agree. I would have loved that a whole lot more than some of the things we got.
She does tell Dean at one moment in the second episode, I think, where she says, well, I'm your mother, you have to do what I say. And, she says it kind of jokingly, but there's also, I think, a little wink and a nod to the idea that all of a sudden now, too, technologically, suddenly she's behind the eight ball. Everything's, computers and smartphones, and the kids in their own, when she looks at the kids not paying attention to the family, they're watching their cell phones, and they're playing on their phones, or they're disconnected. When she talks to the late Lucas's mother, nobody talks on the phone anymore. This was nice. So there's that technological divide. And, this whole idea of the internet is kind of surprising for her. And she doesn't quite know the things that, she has to catch up. And
But we
so
did
that's
get
a lot of
Frank
kids.
as an older person who was also a tech whiz. So we did get to see an older person who was a tech whiz. And before we run out of time, I've got to bring up old Sam.
Oh,
Fright Week aside from the haircut,
yes.
What about the treatment for old Sam? Somebody want to jump in?
We do see him kind of as he goes through. I like the montage with, where we see him with his young son and all and the progression. But yes, everybody's complaining about the wig, which was pretty awful. But did you notice that his hands, they didn't age his hands. They didn't pay attention to his hands. His hands are very young looking. And as he's lying in his deathbed, they didn't age his hands at all.
It was
Well,
pandemic.
That was shot during COVID. So I think they couldn't do as much with prosthetics or makeup because of COVID restrictions.
Right.
And that's my theory on why we got that. And that's also my theory why I think that's his own hair teased and sprayed and turned.
Yeah, I don't know why that didn't, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, that was just that was tangential, and on my part, it was just one of those little things that bugged, where you say, what about his hand? But he was, to see that on his deathbed. But Lynn, you were gonna.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that to me felt like a gift, because I never actually expected in Supernatural that we would see either of them aged and see either of them be able to like carry on like that. So even though it was a short montage, it was clearly meant to show us that while he continued to grieve and continued to be sad about losing Dean, he really did carry on, which is, you know, it's the embodiment of that always keep fighting message. And I thought that that was just an amazing gift. Yes, he wasn't a hunter. Yay, he did get out. He didn't want to hunt after he wasn't with Dean. I'm sure he would have kept hunting as long as he could if they were both there together. But when Dean was gone, he kind of honored his brother's wish for him, and he did the really hard thing. And by all accounts, if you look at the montage, he did a great job of it, and he raised a wonderful son. And when he was ready to go, he was ready to go. So it ended up having ultimately a really hopeful message about death, and about death not being the end, because after the barn scene, we got the bridge scene. So I never thought Supernatural would end on such a hopeful, positive, inspiring note. I can never really get myself totally into the headspace of people who were really devastated by the finale. Some really good friends of mine were, whereas I see it as this is so much more of a gift than I ever expected to get from Supernatural. A positive death, and then a reunification and a, you know, a happily ever after up in heaven. The brothers reunited, and Chuck and Cass are there in charge, and Bobby's there. And I mean, I think that's a very happy ending.
Well, Sam,
Your write-up on that was awesome, Lynn, by the way. Your write-up for that
Oh,
in
thank you.
the was just, I think it hit all the notes. I'm sorry, Gail, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, I was going to say, Sam got to age in place in his own home, which is a real thing for people as they get older. He had loved ones. He didn't lose himself. We have the impression that he knew who he was all the way to the end. So we know he was looking forward to finding Dean again. He created a new life without letting go of what was important to him. He raised a son, you know, all those things that seemed so out of reach through so much of the show, we saw Sam achieve and have a life that had love in it. And so I agree, it was an incredibly positive view of aging, even though we were sad that he passed. He's wearing Dean's old watch. We know he was looking forward to the next thing. And I thought that was really a beautiful ending, and they got it right dealing with old age in the end. Well, folks, I know there's more we haven't talked about, but we have, as always, burned through our time. So maybe sometime we can come back and have a second course of this. But for now, let's let everybody say where we can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, tell us about it, please. Susan.
Yes, Mandy Taylor and I are working on our second essay collection. It's Women in Supernatural, and we expect that to be out in early 2024. So we have some awesome contributors and are in the process of looking for hopefully one of the cast to write our forward and or afterward, or we may come calling to Lynn again. That could happen. But
feel free.
Awesome. But we are working on that. Women in Supernatural is on Twitter. We're on Twitter with that. And that was mostly when we were doing the call for papers. We haven't spent a lot of time over there, but you know, anybody is welcome to find us there. It's mostly on Twitter. So and as always, Gail, this has been delightful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Lynn?
You can find the Supernatural books, Family Don't End with Blood, and There'll Be Peace When You Are Done at peacewhenyouaredone.com. And you can, as of yesterday, pre-order Soups Ain't Always Heroes. There is a pre-order site where if you pre-order, you get free artwork, original artwork. And that is at smartpopbooks.com/theboys. And you can find me on all social media at FangasmSPN.
Okay, I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I'm on most of the social media and I'm under those names. So if you spell them right, you'll find me. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook. As I mentioned, I blog for the Winchester Family Business Blog, but most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you both so much for being with us. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up, so we'll see you online.